good morning, everybody. So we are delighted to have Colonel Buzz Patterson with us. He is a retired U.S. Air Force. He's been a military aide, best-selling author, popular conservative public speaker, and TV talk show host. And from the years of 1996 to 1998, he was a military aide to Bill Clinton. Now, how many of you ladies are fans of handbags? You like handbags? Nobody likes handbags? Purses? Yeah. He carried a really important purse. He carried the nuclear football. A man bag, a man purse, right? Sorry, I'm getting over a cold here. And it contained the nation's nuclear capability, and it accompanied the president at all times. So as such, Colonel Patterson also accompanied the president at all times. And he had an office and a bedroom in the White House, which was right next to the Clintons. So I'm sure he has a lot of stuff to share with us, so I want to make my introduction very brief. So please give him a warm welcome.
Yeah, good morning. We got lots to cover this morning. Number one, what a great week for the Trump family, right? So on Friday, we defeat ISIS in Syria. On Sunday, he gets exonerated with the Mueller report. And then what happened on Monday? It's been a long week. Avenatti got arrested, yes. Creepy porn lawyer dude got arrested and is facing up to 100 years in jail. So it's been a big weekend for the Trumps. So anyway, I'm Buzz Patterson. Thank you very much for having me, Jan. Thanks for the invitation. I come up from the Los Angeles area. I was an Air Force pilot for 20 years. I came into the Air Force under President Ronald Reagan, a phenomenal commander-in-chief. I flew in combat. Yes, Ronald Reagan, give that. In fact, my family and I live about a mile and a half from the Reagan Library, and if you haven't been there, you owe it to yourself to go, because it is by far the best President's Library I've ever spoken at or been to, and I'm about a mile and a half away, so we go frequently. In fact, my wife works there, so that's how closely we are to the Reagan Foundation. So I came in under President Ronald Reagan. I flew in combat around the globe for the Air Force. I actually operated into and out of 69 countries in my 29 years. I saw a lot of things, good and bad. Was involved in the Grenada invasion. My very first operation in the military was invading Grenada under President Ronald Reagan. I flew in the Persian Gulf War, the first one. I flew in the Bosnian War, Rwanda, Somalia, Haiti, all those insurgencies that we had, I was involved in. And in the fall of 1995, I'm a squadron commander in Northern California, up in Fairfield, Vacaville area. Travis Air Force Base is where I was stationed at the time, where I met my now wife, Nicole. She's from Chico. So we were Northern California originally. So the phone in my office rings, and if you've never been around a flying squadron, it's a lot like a fraternity in a college. We played hard and we worked hard. We fought hard. So the phone in my office rings, and the voice on the phone says it's the White House calling to talk to me about coming to work to take a job at the White House. So assuming it was the guys down the hall, I hung up on the White and the phone rang again, and the gentleman said, "No, this really is the White House. I'd like to talk to you about coming out to Washington, D.C. So I flew out to interview to be President Bill Clinton's military aide. Now, I knew the job existed. I didn't really know much about the job. I knew that it involved a large black satchel called the nuclear football. So I flew out. I was one of 6 that the Air Force had identified. You can't apply for the job. The Air Force and the White House picks a group of nominees, and then you go out and go through the interview process. And I was one of the 6. So I flew out to Washington, D.C. It was a 3-day interview process, very intensive background check. They had talked to my childhood friends, my high school friends, my college roommates. They had my tax returns. They had my credit card receipts. So they pretty much knew more about myself than I did. But I got through that process, and it was Mr. Leon Panetta at the time, who was the chief of staff of the White House, who actually was the one that hired me. And then shortly thereafter, I was working at the White House as a young Air Force major. I remember walking into the White House my very first day. It was March of a beautiful spring day in 1996, and I walk in as a major going, just, walking into the most important building in the world to work for the most important human being in the world. And it was just quite a privilege. And I was really, to be quite honest with you, I was kind of a blank slate politically. I was a military guy, so my political beliefs were right of center, obviously. But I really didn't know. I had not voted for President Clinton. Wasn't particularly impressed with President Clinton, but they didn't ask me that question in the interview, so I didn't have to answer it. So I snuck under their radar apparently, so I started in 1996, and that was the re-election campaign. I remember the re-election summer of 1996 when President Clinton was about to be re-elected for a second term in office as our commander-in-chief and our president. And it didn't take me long. So my job was carrying this large black satchel, which is called the nuclear football. And every president's military aide since President John F. Kennedy with the advent of nuclear weapons and the Cuban Missile Crisis realized he had to have nuclear launch capability right by his side. So prior to Kennedy, there wasn't that process in place. So JFK added the additional role onto the military. There's been a military aid going back to George Washington. But under President John F. Kennedy, the military aid position got the added authority and added obligation of having to carry the nuclear football. And the football is a large black satchel. It weighs about 45 pounds. It has everything the president needs, no matter where the president is, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether we're in Air Force One over Africa, whether we're in the White House, whether we're in Australia, Europe, Marine One, Air Force One, that football and that military aid is by the president's side 24/7 around the clock. And as we speak right now, there's a military aid by President Trump's side with that exact same football, that exact same obligation, no matter where President Trump is. There's a military aid right by his side as we speak right now. So I was that guy for 2 years. So as such, I had an office in the White House and a bedroom in the White House, so I essentially lived with the Clintons for 2 years, which was an eye-opening experience on several levels. People ask me if I have PTSD from combat. I have PTSD from seeing Hillary without makeup in the morning. That's not something you want to see. I actually walked in on Bill and Monica Lewinsky one time, and I still have not bleached that memory out of my mind either. It's like chiseled into my brain, which was not an attractive thing. So anyway, but I was with the Clintons for those 2 years, so I had to be around the president 24/7 throughout the time. So it was a very long year for me, long 2 years. It's actually a 2-year assignment. So. I write my first book is Dereliction of Duty, and I wrote it when I got out of the Air Force for 2 reasons. Number one, when you're in the military, as Lynn knows or anybody else in the military knows, you cannot openly profess your political opinions. You cannot be disdainful of a military commander or anybody in the chain of command. You cannot be verbalizing your thoughts or your opinions. So I couldn't do that in my 2 years working for President Clinton. And when I retired from the Air Force in 2001, I wrote Dereliction of Duty. I'd never written a book before. I'd written a lot of flying manuals on how not to get shot down, but I had never written a book about, a nonfiction book about life in the White House and the Clintons. So I wrote Dereliction of Duty when I got out of the Air Force in 2001. It went right to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Before I knew it, this young major and pilot was on Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly. It was even Chris Matthews had me on 3 or 4 times. I have no idea why, but he did. So I just weathered that storm and went on his show. But the book is really about what we as American citizens should expect and demand from the man or woman we elect to be our commander-in-chief. And we failed miserably with President Bill Clinton. He was unequipped to be a commander-in-chief. He didn't understand the military. He didn't understand war. I mean, if I had known, I read Sun Tzu my entire military life growing up. Okay, this is the book that talks about warfare. It goes back to a Chinese philosopher way back in the day. So, but Bill Clinton didn't want any part of that. Bill Clinton was so risk averse about the military. I'm going to give you 3 examples which really prompted me to write my first book. And I've written 4 total, but the first ones we're talking about right now. So I just gotten into the job, and President Clinton was a big golf fan, as most of you know. So we went to watch a professional golf tournament in Lake Manassas, Virginia. It's called the President's Cup. It's where the American professionals play against the European and international professionals. It's called the President's Cup. And on this one day, we were there at the tournament. The same day, correspondingly, if you recall back in the 1996 time period, Saddam Hussein's in charge of Iraq. Saddam Hussein's trying to extinguish and annihilate, ethnically cleanse the Kurds in the northern part of Iraq. So he has had his Republican Guard now is marching to the northern part of Iraq. He's using chemical and biological weapons. He's trying to basically erase the Kurds from the face of the earth. We as Americans had promised our support for the Kurds. So we had fighters and bombers ready to go in the Middle East, and these were my peers, my fellow pilot, Air Force, and Navy brethren, in these cockpits, ready to go launch and to combat the Republican Guard, repel them, and save hundreds of thousands of Kurdish lives. So one of my jobs as the military aide was to be the call screener for President Clinton. So if anybody wanted to call the president when he was away from the White House, whether it would be Hillary or Jesse Jackson or Roger Clinton or Monica or anybody, the call would come to me. On this day, the call came to me, through me, to get to President Clinton. It was Sandy Berger, who was at the time the National Security Council advisor. You may know him better now as Sandy Burglar, since he stole a bunch of documents from the National Archives, stuffed them in his pants, and got away with it. But at the time, he was the National Security Council advisor. So Berger's on the phone trying to get through me to the president to go ahead and launch the attack. So I approached President Clinton and say, Mr. President, we have Mr. Berger. I'll have Mr. Berger on the phone. He wants to go ahead to launch the attack to defeat the Republican Guard. And Mr. President Clinton says, no, I'm too busy right now. Come back to me a little bit later and we'll talk about it. So I went back to Berger and explained to him, and so now Berger's getting a little bit upset. Berger calls again about 10 minutes later and says, no, actually, I need to talk to the president right now. Our pilots need under cover of darkness. We need to be able to launch the attack. It's nighttime over there. Our best shot is to go when it's dark over there. I need to talk to him to launch the attack. I approached President Clinton the second time. He's now doing an interview with Jim Nantz of CBS Sports. He pushes me away and says, no, I don't want to take the phone call right now. So then I went back to Mr. Berger and said, sir, he's too busy to talk to you right now. Now, Berger is visibly, audibly upset with me because I can't get President Clinton to launch the attack. Clinton's getting mad at me because I'm going back and forth, interrupting his golf. So for a third time, I go to President Clinton and say, sir, we've got to get the go-ahead. We're running out of time. This is what's on the line over there. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds are going to be annihilated. And he says, nope, I won't talk to Berger right now. I'll call him in a limousine going back to the White House. That's it. So the bottom line is we never did launch the attack. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds were killed that day because President Bill Clinton wanted to watch a golf tournament. That was my, as having been a commander in the military, you've got to make a decision, yes or no. And obviously making no decision is making a decision not to do something. And that was our commander-in-chief. And that was one of the first insights I had into the man that we were about to re-elect to be our commander-in-chief again for a second time. Another situation so I knew Monica from day one because I had Oval Office access, and there was only one young intern that had Oval Office access, and that was Monica Lewinsky, young female. So I asked one of the Secret Service guys, who is this lady that has Oval Office access? And he goes, you don't want to go there. That's presidential best friend type stuff. Just leave that alone. Leave her alone. So I saw Monica coming and going. So I knew that was going on my entire time. So one time we were coming back on Air Force One from Europe. It had been a long trip. So what we would typically do on these overseas trips, we'd land on Air Force One at Andrews Air Force Base. We'd get on helicopters, Marine One. We'd helicopter over to the south lawn of the White House. And on this evening, we landed on the south lawn about midnight. I took President Clinton upstairs and put him to bed. I went down to my bedroom, which is in the lower basement of the East Wing, and the phone rang in my office, and it was the president's chief pilot, a good friend of mine, Colonel Mark Donnelly, Air Force Colonel, now flies for Southwest Airlines. So if you ever see Colonel Donnelly, say that Buzz says hey. Mark Donnelly's calling me and said, hey, we got a problem. Buzz, I said, what's the problem? So Mark has got, so the way the way Air Force One works is the pilots and the navigators up front are all military. Everything in the back part of the airplane, all the communications people are Air Force enlisted, senior enlisted. The back of the airplane are all Air Force enlisted flight attendants. So you've got men and women working in the back of the airplane that are all enlisted in the Air Force. So Mark has a young female staff sergeant in front of him in his office at 1:30 in the morning in tears because President Clinton has backed her into a galley and sexually molested her. So I said, okay, what does she want, Mark? He said, all she wants is an apology. She's married. She has 2 young kids at home. She wants to remain promotable in the Air Force. Doesn't want to be on the front page of the Washington Post tomorrow. She just wants the president to apologize to her. So I've been shot at in combat many times, but walking down to the Oval Office the next morning, confronting the commander-in-chief and telling him that me as a major, telling the commander-in-chief he needed to apologize to a young staff sergeant for sexually molesting her on board Air Force One was the single hardest thing I've ever had to do in my entire career, to this day. And his response was simply, he didn't deny it. He didn't even acknowledge it. He said, okay, make it happen. I'll apologize to her. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't work his way around it. He just said, make it happen. So 2 weeks later on Air Force One, I got them together in the Air Force, in the president's office on board Air Force One, and he apologized to her by saying, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings or upset you. That was his apology. Now, she accepted that, fortunately, but that was strike 2 in my book in terms of, because I knew military commanders and military enlisted that were being sent to Fort Leavenworth for much less than that. And here we have the commander-in-chief who was essentially sending them to Fort Leavenworth, getting away with a slap on the wrist and a simple apology. I'll tell one more Bill story, then I'm going to get on to Hillary, and then we're going to start talking about what's happening today. Do I have time? I'll keep going? Yes. Oh, yeah. So the third and final strike with President Clinton. And there were strikes every single day, so I'm just giving you guys the highlights. And they're all in my book, so if you want to buy my book, they're all back in there. So as the military aide, I had the nuclear football. The president carries every president since John F. Kennedy has carried a credit card-sized document, which is the nuclear codes. We call it the biscuit because in the military we like to give things stupid names, but it's a thing where you tear it open and you read a series of numbers and letters, and that's how the president identifies himself to the Pentagon as being the president, and that happens through the military aide. So my job quarterly was to go brief President Clinton and say, do you have any questions about how the process works, anything else militarily you want to talk about, and oh, by the way, can I just acknowledge that you have the codes on you? Well, this morning was the exact same morning. I was number 1 on his schedule, 7 o'clock in the morning. This was the exact same morning that the Monica Lewinsky affair hit the national media. So they say timing is everything, and timing is absolutely everything. So I'm walking into the outer part of the Oval Office. So the way the Oval Office works is there's an outer secretary area. Betty Currie was the secretary. There's the actual official formal Oval Office, and then there's a back area, an informal office back where President Clinton would go sometimes, and there's a couch back there, watch football, and hang out with Monica. On this morning, though, I know, so I'm first on the schedule, and I'm walking in, and Betty Currie's not there yet, but I'm walking past all the newspapers that we've stacked up for him to read that morning, the Washington Post, the LA Times, New York Times, and the Washington Post headline is, Sex Scandal Rocks White House. So I know it's not going to be a great day to be working in the Clinton White House. No day was, but this day particularly is not going to be a happy time. So I knock on the door and I go into the Oval Office, and there's President Clinton sitting behind the desk with his head in his hands, and he can tell he's been up all night. He's white as a ghost. His eyes are red. He knows he's been caught, finally been caught. And I walk in and say, sir, I know this is not a great morning. I can come back later. do you have any questions? I'll be happy to come back this afternoon or whatever. He goes, yeah, that's fine. Come on back later. I said, well, if you don't mind, if I could just confirm that you have the nuclear codes. He goes, I don't have them. I said, oh, are they upstairs? He goes, I don't know where they are. And so I pressed him. I said, how long has it been since you've seen them? He goes, I said, it's been days. He goes, I don't know. I said, has it been weeks? He goes, I can't recall. I said, has it been months? He goes, I have no idea. So we did a quick sweep of the White House, and we never did find the codes, by the way. So here is a sitting commander-in-chief who's lost the most important military document in the history of mankind. And on the same morning that Monica Lewinsky has hit the national press, and all he says to me is, just make sure this doesn't get to the press. Just make sure you don't let this leak. And I said, sure, of course I won't, sir. I understand. And it didn't until I wrote my first book, but now it's out there. And secondly, I had to call the White House. I had to call the Pentagon because this had never happened before. So there was no process for recreating the codes. Now, these are the same codes that every nuclear submarine carries, that every nuclear bomber carries, that every missile silo that's around our country. All the same codes are carried by those officers on our triad of nuclear capability. So all of those codes had to be replaced overnight. And we don't know how long they've been compromised. We never did find them. But the Pentagon, they were incredulous. B, they were mad at me. I didn't lose them. We did look on eBay. They weren't there. So, but they had to recreate them very, very quickly, which is what they did. So he created this massive tidal wave, if you can, through American U.S. security because he lost the codes. And the most important thing to him was that it not make the press because it was going to ruin his legacy, which I think he did a pretty good job of ruining himself. Hillary. And I'm going to be opening up here for questions a little while. You guys can ask me anything about any of these people, and I'll be brutally honest with you. Bill Clinton and I hung out a lot. And when he wasn't being presidential, he was actually a pretty fun guy to be around. I mean, he was a great storyteller, very gregarious, not a single moral fiber in his body, but somebody you'd want to hang around with, right? Somebody you'd want to have over to your house for a barbecue, but keep him away from your wife and your daughter. You just know that going in. Hillary was the exact opposite. Hillary was the person that kept the trains running on time. She, especially when Bill got in trouble with Monica, when that all hit, and she was on NBC News saying it's a vast right-wing conspiracy. She had known about Monica for years. In fact, Hillary was the one that got Monica reassigned to the Pentagon, and Monica just kept coming back when Hillary wasn't at the White House, so that didn't really work too well. But Hillary was one of those people that very intelligent, not nearly as polished a politician, not a very good speaker, and just kind of hell on wheels around the staff. When I first got there, I had 3 or 4 weeks of very classified background briefings because I had the same clearance that President Clinton had, so I could see intelligence all the way up to the top. And the guy who was giving me all these briefings said, if you remember nothing else, Buzz, about all of this, just remember this: don't piss her off because you'll never survive. And that was the best advice I've gotten in my entire life. And I didn't make her mad, and I did survive. But I saw a lot of people around her that didn't heed that advice, and she would just literally rip their hearts out and abuse them and demean them, humiliate them. One time we were going down to Martha's Vineyard. No, we were going down to St. Thomas for a New Year's Eve family get-together. And we had left D.C. It was Bill and Hillary and Chelsea and the senior staff. It was going to be kind of a light load going down to St. Thomas. They had rented a private home, and I was in the bungalow outside the private home with the doctor, Secret Service agents. So we get down to St. Thomas and Air Force One, and we land, and I can see up front, in the front part of the airplane, that there's a lot of commotion going on. I can hear Hillary's voice above all others, and she is spinning herself into the ceiling because apparently Chelsea has left her textbooks back on the bedside table at the previous hotel in Hilton Head, South Carolina. and it's everybody's fault but Chelsea's. So it's midnight now in St. Thomas, and Hillary is demanding that we get those books down to Chelsea before she wakes up in the morning. Now we're on Christmas break, right? We're on a holiday break. So I told her I'd take care of it. We had to scramble a U.S. jet to fly down from Andrews with 2 pilots to go to that hotel, to get 2 textbooks, to fly into St. Thomas. They were on Chelsea's bedside table the next morning. And that was a day in the life of Hillary. And it was like that almost every single day. Something like that would happen. We were in Mexico City coming back. We were going to helicopter from Marine One. So we had a landing zone, a Marine One landing zone at the hotel in Mexico City. We were going to helicopter in Marine One over to Mexico City International Airport, get on Air Force One, and then fly to Washington, D.C. So we take off on the very secure landing zone from Marine One. We get airborne. We're heading over to the airport, just about to land at the airport. And Hillary realizes she's left her sunglasses back at the hotel, at the hotel, which is about 30-minute flight or an hour drive. So she wants us to divert Marine One back to the hotel so we can get her sunglasses. And she is raising hell about it. Now, the problem with this from a security standpoint is all those Secret Service guys that were at the landing zone now are in vehicles trying to just get up to the airport as fast as possible to make sure the airport is secure, and they get on Marine One, or Air Force One also to go home to Washington, D.C. as well. So if we go back to the hotel, it's not going to be anybody back there security-wise to assist in our landing and to make sure that the location is secure. But she is throwing a fit. Finally, I was able to convince her. I said, "Ma'am, I'll call back on the radio. I'll have somebody in the hotel go down, find them, and FedEx them to you overnight. Would that be okay?" And she calmed down and said, "Yeah, that would be great." But she was going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to divert Marine One back to the hotel for her sunglasses. Somebody asked me about her throwing things. I never saw the lamp incident. However, I did see a book incident. We were coming back. Sometimes in the evenings we would go do these events around Washington, D.C., and if the speech writer was not there, I would sit in the limousine with President Clinton and help him with his notes and his speech preparation. So on this particular case, we were coming back from a speech we had given in Richmond, Virginia, back up I-95 going into D.C., and it was Bill, Hillary on the back bench, me on the front bench facing them. And so right behind me is the Secret Service guy driving the limousine. So we're hauling down I-95 in this motorcade. We've got police officers and limousines and protective details and SWAT teams and media and press coverage and all that kind of stuff. And Hillary decides at the last minute as we're coming into Washington, D.C., she wants to go get dinner at one of the restaurants. Well, the problem with that is it takes the Secret Service about 30 minutes to go to a restaurant to sweep it, make sure the chef's not putting poison in the food, all kinds of other things. So she's reading a book, and when the agent turns around and says, "Ma'am, that's not possible, we need more time than that," he turns back around, and she takes her book, which is a hardcover, and throws it at the back of the now we're doing 65 miles an hour on a highway. This guy's driving, and it hits him in the back of the head, and he slumps over. So all I'm thinking is now that we're going to crash with the president and the first lady on board. Fortunately, he was a Secret Service trained killer, so he pops right back up again, shakes it off, and keeps driving. But and that's the kind of thing that we dealt with, Hillary Clinton. So after I retired from the Air Force in 2001, I retired because our first child was born premature. She was had a lot of medical issues and came home on a heart monitor and oxygen and the whole nine. So I turned down promotion to general to get out of the Air Force. And I went to fly for Delta Airlines, which is when I decided to write my first book. So I was a Delta pilot, and I wrote 4 books, 2 bestsellers, 4 books total. So I flew for Delta at LAX for 2001 to 2016, and then when Hillary announced she was going to run again in 2016, I said, I cannot sit on my hands in a cockpit and let this woman, become our commander-in-chief and president. So I retired. Thank you. I retired from Delta to do this, to go around my state, our state, and speak, and to illuminate the truth I love talking to the high school kids. I do a lot of speaking on college campuses, believe it or not. There are conservatives on college campuses too. Not a lot of them, but there are a few. So I do this full time for a living. I speak and I sell books and I continue to write, and I do have a TV show I do on the internet, which hopefully will be picked up by Sirius pretty soon. We're working on that contract right now. So if you can follow me on the Buzz Cut, is my show. And I also do one called Power and Patriots, which is done with, I have two co-hosts, a Army officer who is a tank guy, a Marine officer who is a surface warfare gal, and the pilot, me. So we've got pretty much the services covered. And it's both lighthearted, but it's also a look at the military, from the military perspective, for the military. But more importantly, do you realize today in this country, during World War II, 12% of our population was actually in uniform, 12%. Today, it's less than 1/2 of 1%. So 99% plus in this country have no affiliation with the military right now. So we wanted to put the information out there. We do a TV show once a week called Power and Patriots, which is designed for you to understand what the military is all about, what Trump's doing, what's happening with North Korea, with Iran, with Venezuela, the Democrats, the enemy within, what's happening on the border. So in 2016, I was asked by the Trump campaign to be a surrogate in California. I actually went to college with Steve Bannon. I got a lot of Steve Bannon stories too, good and bad. Steve's a good guy, actually, for the most part. A little rough around the edges, but not a bad guy. So I was a surrogate for President Trump in 2016. Very happy to do so. I'll be doing it again in 2020. And I'll tell you why I'm doing this, and I'll open it up for questions. Because I voted for President Trump not because he's a perfect human being, not because he doesn't have not because he's a perfect, morally correct individual, but because I wanted somebody who could come in from outside, that could, having been in Washington, D.C. all those years and seen both sides of the aisle and how it works in D.C., how the process is so overtly broken, I wanted somebody to come in there that could just break stuff up and start change. And that's what Trump is doing. And he has done it in spite of relentless headwinds. This Russia collusion thing, I mean, in everything, I mean, there's never a day that you cannot wake up and turn to CNN or MSNBC or any mainstream media site and not see something else about why Trump's going to jail. And he has done it, in spite of that, he's given us the best economy we've ever seen. He has lowered the middle income tax cuts. He has defeated ISIS. He has economy's booming. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. He pulled us out of that. He smacked down Iran with the whole Iran nuclear deal. He's holding Kim Jong-un in North Korea he's holding him, basically saying, "Hey, we'll play ball with you, or we'll hurt you." So he has turned around Barack Obama's legacy to the point right now there's not going to be anything Barack Obama's presidential library. There's not going to be anything there. The only thing he has left is a little sliver of health care, and that's going away rapidly. There's going to be a whole bunch of empty halls and cobwebs. So that's why I voted for Trump. I'm really happy to be here with you guys. I can answer questions for the rest of the day, so fire away. Yes, sir.
If you were looking for a source to verify these stories about Hillary with the Pizzagate and the spirit cooking, and which even claims that the children of Haiti are being eaten for their adrenochrome, what source would you go to verify that kind of?
Yeah, I'm kind of skeptical. I know the Clintons are capable of just about absolutely anything. I mean, if you have seen the list of people associated with them have died, I'm still walking around, which I'm pretty happy about. But there's a lot of people out there that have not made it. The Pizzagate thing. John Podesta was the chief of staff of the White House when I was there, after Panetta left, And I have never met a more despicable human being in my entire life. And he's still out there. He was her campaign manager most recently. I would not put anything beyond him. I tried not to get into those areas unless I have 100% knowledge of what's going on. I mean, I know about, Lolita Express and the island and Bill, and that doesn't surprise me one bit either. But unless I know firsthand, I try not to go there. I just have too many other things that I've actually seen that I can talk about that I don't need to. I mean, yeah, I don't want to. I want to be as 100% verifiable as I possibly can. Yes, ma'am, over there.
Yeah, so you were talking about how strict your security clearance was. So how the heck did Obama, who didn't even have a legitimate birth certificate that can test that kind of security clearance?
Yeah, the security clearances, this is how it works in the White House. And this is one of the reasons why Hillary's emails really, really bug me. So most of us who have gone through the security clearance background check have had a very extensive and intensive look into everything about us. The president does not have to meet those standards. The president, being the president, by virtue of being the president, is automatically given one. Bill Clinton couldn't have gotten one either, based on his background. And when I was there, we had several members of our senior staff that weren't eligible to get them either due to drug abuse, domestic violence. We still gave them because President Clinton said to give them to him. So when President Trump ordered Jared Kushner to get one, it was no big deal, in my opinion, because we had about 330 Clinton staffers that didn't qualify in my time that got him anyway. So the president, by virtue of being the president, gets to see anything he wants to see or anything she wants to see. And Hillary Clinton, the first lady, had the exact same access, which is why when she says she didn't understand what was going on with the emails and she didn't understand the classifications, I briefed that lady at least 75 times on classified information, very classified information, and she understood full well what the different unclassified, classified, top secret, TS, CSI, she understood all that stuff, okay? So she was just blowing smoke and being and lying. So the fact that she used a private server when she was Secretary of State, she knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to cover up tracks, and she did it pretty well. And she also used a couple hammers and some bleach bit to get rid of the rest of the evidence. Now, if people are trying to get Trump held accountable for obstruction of justice, that's obstruction of justice. When you beat up hard drives and cell phones. And that's why I'm really glad Lindsey Graham announced yesterday he's going to go back and look at how this whole thing started. And I think it's way beyond time. We simply can't have two levels of justice in the country, one for the Clintons and one for the rest of us. Because if anybody else had done that, we would be in Fort Leavenworth breaking big rocks into small rocks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just as small. It's an honor to meet you. I was ahead of you in line. I didn't realize it was you. I was spilling potatoes. What do you, if you had to go to the dentist or something when you were doing that, and did you have 24/7, but did you have any relief?
Yes, I did. Actually, good question. So I was the senior military. So what they do is there's 5 military aides, and every 2 years they change the senior. So the services will swap responsibilities. So it was my turn it was the Air Force's turn to have the senior guy. So I was the senior guy. So I had a Marine, Coast Guard, Navy, and Army working for me. So I did get home 3 or 4 days a month to get my suits in and out of the dry cleaners and to see my wife. We didn't have children at the time. Thank God we didn't have kids at the time. But I did get a chance to get home. So one of the other guys would pick up for me there. But we also had the responsibility. So a typical presidential trip is no easy undertaking. So, for example, my last trip with President Clinton was a 9-country, 12-day Africa trip. So you have to have advance teams going out to every single city the president's going to visit and do look at the motorcade routes, scope out the hotels, scope out the hospitals, make sure that I was also responsible for all these highly classified evacuation scenarios. So say somebody takes a shot at President Trump today in Mar-a-Lago. there's going to be 6 evacuation scenarios that get President Trump out of harm's way that involve fixed-wing assets and helicopter assets. So no matter where the president goes, 24/7, there are at least six evacuation scenarios with helicopters on standby, airplanes on standby, crews, Secret Service. So if you can imagine what a typical day, when Trump goes to 4 states in one day, that is probably about 3,000 advanced people, a whole lot of assets, helicopters and fixed wings. So on our 9-country, 12-day trip to Africa, just getting people around with military aircraft and moving the helicopters was $74 million. And that's in 1998 dollars. So it'd probably be twice that today. So the military also, so the senior guy, I had to oversee all of that stuff. So what we would do, we would play a shell game. So if President Trump today is going to go from Washington, D.C. to Lima, Ohio to speak at a tank plant, a military aide goes to Lima, Ohio a couple days in advance with Secret Service and with doctors and nurses and does a complete, thorough background and checks the whole place out, checks out the hotel, checks out the motorcade routes, checks out the hospital, and is there waiting when the president gets there. When the president gets there, the senior guy comes off the airplane with the football, hands it to the guy that's been on the ground for 2 days who knows where everything is, and then I go to bed or I go to the hotel and hang out. And he has the president for the rest of that day. And then when it's time to get back on Air Force One, I meet him back there. I get the football back. I get the president back. I get back on board. I go to the next spot, to the next city. The next city's got, say it's Detroit. Next city, Detroit's got a guy who's been there with doctors and nurses and Secret Service. He knows what's going on because he's been there for a few days too. So he knows where everything is. So we would just hand the football off like a hot potato. So whoever has the president has the football. So that's how we did it, and so it's a massive logistics planning thing. When we would do states, and I'm probably sure it's probably increased dramatically, but when I was doing it for Trump, for Clinton, we would go stateside would be about 750 people per city. Overseas would be about 1,500 to 2,000 per city. So it's huge because we have to do our own cell phone networks secure, satellite networks secure, all of our own, we would basically invade, take over a hotel, rip out all the phone wires, put in our own stuff, and make sure that the Secret Service guys knew exactly where everything is. And it's, I remember we were checking into a hotel in Johannesburg, and the girl behind the desk was just overwhelmed. And she goes, "You guys invade?" And I said, "Yeah, this is nothing. This is really nothing. It gets a lot worse than this." Yes, ma'am.
If you had to use that for all during
Mm-hmm.
your time, what did that set in motion? What would that have set in motion?
Okay, good question. The question is if I had to use the football. So the way it works is, say that there's 2 scenarios. Say that somebody like China or North Korea launches on us. So we have only a few minutes, 20 minutes or less, depending on exactly where the missile's coming from, to respond. So the president and the military aide get together. The military aide is the only person that can actually get inside the football. You know, the formula to the football, the code, only the military aide knows for reasons of protection. But the president's got the actual real codes. So I get in the football, he gets the codes out, we exchange, we go, yeah, those that's right, let's go. So I communicate with the Pentagon. Pentagon says National Military Command Center then takes the phone call or the radio call, whatever we're doing it on, and they authenticate with the president that he is in fact the commander-in-chief, that he has the ability, and then it flows from there. So if the president says, I want to launch, so the targeting is like a Denny's menu, a breakfast menu. You've got options A through, whatever. You can shoot one missile, or you can let everything go. So it's obviously a pretty sobering prospect. Yeah, well, that and you want to go back at them, right? So if Russia shoots at us and they're going after Washington, D.C., for example, we're going to take out Moscow. So we're launching both. We want to stop that missile, but we also want to send a message back to them that they're not going to survive either. So that has to be done like in 4 to 5 minutes. Now, thankfully, we practice this all the time. So we did. I'm sure they do it all the time now. We would do it at least quarterly with the president. So we would have some kind of scenario. We'd get in the Oval Office. We'd put him on. We'd make sure everything's ready to roll, and we would do the scenario. But there's also without getting into too much classified information here, the way that the communications go down through all the unified commanders, all the 4-stars that are in charge of the different branches and the different commands around the world are also on a very quick conference call, hopefully, and they come to the phone very quickly, because if they're not, they don't get to play. So if they're not there in a matter of 45 seconds or so, they don't get to be part of the decision-making process. So it goes just like that. So it's not to freak anybody out, but the way that the U.S. has done it, in my opinion, so some of the countries like Russia and South Korea, it's all computerized, and it's done through laptops. Now, what we do, I think, is we keep the human element in it. We keep a human being talking to a human being, talking to another human being, and making rational decisions that can't be hacked. So we have always kept the human element in it. I think that's the way to go. People have talked in the past about, modernizing it and making it. That's just not. I wanted the ability. I always thought that if the president, in my mind, was not of sound mind or body, or was intoxicated or something, and was making that decision, I wanted the ability to not have to do exactly what he said. So President Clinton got intoxicated a lot. So I don't know about Trump. I don't think Trump drinks, but Bill Clinton did. Yes, yes, sir. How did Hillary Clinton amass? Yeah, well, they've done it. This is a great question. The question is, how do the Clintons amass such power? One of the things I will tell you that's really impressive, being up close and personal with the Clintons, is that they have created this amazing political machine. They have, since their days in Little Rock, Arkansas, they have built a group of loyal subjects who will pay them lots of money and will stand by their side no matter what they do or what they say. When they left the White House, if you remember, she said they were broke. They were hardly broke. But then again, the Clinton Foundation was created right about then, which is now being looked into, by the way, which is the real crime. So they've done it through their friends, their very, very rich friends in Hollywood, the David Geffens of the world and the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, although he's going to jail. But George Soros is a close buddy of theirs. George Soros, if you want to find what's wrong with this country, if you look deep enough, you're going to find George Soros literally everywhere. Literally everywhere. Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you have any inside information from the people who are in your role now about what it's like to protect the country and to be near Trump in a military role, in terms of what the morale is like for them and how safe our president is given Trump derangement syndrome. And also, gosh, you seem like not at all a gossipy kind of man, given your background and your stature. So I'm really wondering what it was like to take this inside information, what that was like for you after you revealed that and fielding your new identity.
Well, thank you. The first question was, what's it like today? I'm going to paraphrase. What's it like today in armed forces, and what's the morale like, and what's it like to be protecting President Trump with the high levels of Trump derangement syndrome that are bouncing around? And second question was, I'm not a gossipy kind of guy. In fact, when I wrote this book, my first book, I was really clearly to the publisher that I did not want to make this a kiss and tell book. This is a book that is written by a military officer very objectively about how the many ways President Clinton failed us as our commander-in-chief. I mentioned Monica Lewinsky in the book one time only because it happened to coincide with President Clinton losing the codes, and I thought that was an important element of that story. Now, I will tell you that I've written 4 books. My most recent book was called Conduct and Becoming, and it talks about the many ways that Barack Obama failed the military and national security. And so I'll be actually selling 2 today. One's the first one about the Clintons, and the second one is my most recent, Conduct and Becoming. Now, what happened, because of the wars, because of Iraq and Afghanistan, under President George W. Bush, and then the 8 years of Barack Obama, our military has been depleted and is overstretched. I have friends that have been to Iraq and or Afghanistan 10 times and are still deployable. But they have done that in an amazing and a very resilient manner. I flew over to spend the summer of 2006 in Iraq as an embedded journalist. I took a leave of absence from Delta Airlines and went over there and spent 2 months in Iraq. And number one, as a tourist tip, you're not going to want to hang out in Iraq, especially in the summertime. It gets up to about 125, 130 every single day. You can't. They have this like really fine powdered sand that gets up in the air in the morning, and it just kind of hangs in the air, so you can't breathe either. So you're sweating and you're just consuming large quantities of water, and you can't see. So it wasn't a great environment. But I got to hang out with a lot of. So I'm an Air Force guy, so I spent most of my career at 35,000 feet doing things to bad guys. So, but when I went to Iraq, I got to hang out on the ground with Army guys and Marines, and it was so eye-opening and a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me, and I'll never forget it because I learned a lot, and they were just, what I saw was the new greatest generation this country has to offer, and it's these young men and women that are fighting these wars over the Middle East right now. They are amazing professionals. I think President Trump is doing the absolute right thing by putting money back into the military, by making it worth being in the military again, by acknowledging their sacrifices. You will not, if you have a chance, I wish every American actually could go spend some time with a deployed group of our military men and women. It's just it's a remarkable, it'll make you feel like an American 10 times over. You'll understand why our birthright is so important to us and why this place is much better than any other place in the world. And I was in an argument the other day on Twitter. I have a Twitter feed, which is pretty hilarious if you want to go on my Twitter feed. It's good stuff. I like to take shots at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I spend most of my days, and most of my free time is spent trolling her and Hillary. So, so please follow me at Buzz Patterson. But anyway, I was going to say, I got in an argument the other day with some leftists about our military and how the military members were just forced to go into the military because they had gotten in trouble with the law in high school, and I ran into the same kind of thing when I was at the Clinton White House. One time I'd been in the Clinton White House for about, I don't know, a year and a half, I guess. I was wearing my uniform one day, and a young female staffer stopped me and said, "Hey, I want to ask you about your background." I said, "Sure." She goes, "Why did you get in the military? Were you forced to come in?" I said, "No." And she goes, "Do you have a GED, or how did you?" I said, "No, actually, I have an MBA. I have my bachelor's and an MBA, and I came in the military after that because I wanted to serve my country." That kind of logic and that kind of self-service, that kind of selfishness service to country, most liberals just can't understand. That's why they don't get the military in general. They cannot understand why anybody would want to do that and not just be in New York selling stocks or something. They understand why anybody would want to go to the extremes, to go into Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, and do that because you made the decision to do that. Somebody else had not forced you to do that. So that's why conservatives, I think, we get the military, we understand it. Most liberals, and I've got a brother who's way out in left field, he doesn't get it either. So we just don't talk. We just don't talk about stuff like that. Love him to death. He's an idiot. So yes, ma'am.
What is your viewpoint on some of the military leaders that have said that Trump pushing some of the military to protect the border is stretching us too thin? And what can we do, or what do you think?
I think that those military members are completely out of their minds. I think we have plenty of money. I used to work for the Air Force. I used to work the Air Force budget. So I know how money works in those DOD authorizations. And there's plenty of money. We have money in the Department of Defense for construction. We have it for construction training. We have it for security. If you go to any military facility anywhere, you're going to see a fence around it, right? A wall. So yeah, and so there was not a single military facility in this world that we own that doesn't have a wall around it or a fence. So we have the money to do that. The military guys, the Army Corps of Engineers and the Navy Seabees are the perfect guys to do it. They can get it done in probably half the time, these contractors, and taking the lowest bidder type contractors down there. So I think that those military leaders that are claiming that either are doing it for political reasons, because there's a lot of politics in the Pentagon too. Trust me, it's a sad commentary, and one of the reasons why I got out as well, because a lot of the Obama holdovers are still in the Pentagon, and it's harder to get rid of a military 3 or 4 star than you could possibly imagine. So a lot of those guys are doing it for their next career after they get out of the military. But yeah, the military can do this. They can do it quicker, probably better, and we're doing it. And I can't think of a better way to do it. it is national security in my estimation, no shadow of a doubt. I live in Southern California. I see it every single day. I see the MS when I go down to downtown LA occasionally for business meetings. It looks to me like a fourth world country. The homelessness, the needles, the human feces, the tent cities. Yeah, and I don't know why a liberal cannot say let's put a cap on that, right? We have enough human suffering. Let's not invite more. So I think it is national security 100%. Yes, ma'am, in the back. We have the best of the best. What you see Russia and China has done over the years, because of very lax oversight, especially with the Clinton administration. Not sure if I want to get into this, but I will. The biggest crime that President Clinton committed was not Monica Lewinsky. The biggest crime President Clinton committed was when he authorized Loral Systems to sell missile technology and ballistic missile capabilities to the Chinese in exchange for campaign fundraising. That was done under President Clinton's watch. So a lot of what Russia and China has been either stolen from us or given to them by us, and that's on us. And that's why I think also one of the reasons why Trump is really cracking down on the tariffs and trade is because we cannot give away our intellectual capital anymore. You know, it's just we've been doing it for 20 years. If you look at any Soviet airplane in their Soviet Air Force, it looks just like one of our airplanes. There is no likelihood that they came up with that design on their own. They got it from us. Same with the Chinese. Now we have state-of-the-art stuff. I've got a really good friend who's working now in robotics, on combat zone robotics, where we're going to be eventually one of these days not having any troops out there. It's all going to be robotics. We're already doing it in the air with drones, and you're going to see the fighter pilot go away. You're going to see bomber pilots go away. It's going to all be done from a guy sitting in an office space someplace in Las Vegas or in Nevada, or we do it out of Palmdale right now as well. My wife's got a cousin who kills bad people over in Afghanistan sitting in an office in Palmdale by flying drones around with missiles. So that's where we're going. So there's a lot of things I can't talk about in that regard, but we're beyond. We're doing really, really well. Yes, sir. Sure. That's a really good question. No, not at all. This comes up quite a bit. Now, during the interview process, the only question they ever asked me about my partisan or my political views was, had I voted for President Clinton? And I said no. I hadn't voted for anybody that particular election, so I had voted no. I assumed President H.W. Bush was going to be reelected, and I didn't bother to vote. Now, they expect, and they're right, they expect that when you're doing your job, you are there to serve the office of the presidency. You are a military officer. I was loyally sworn to that job, and he never got anything but my utmost effort the entire time I was there. So that's how I got through my days, even though as I got there, as I was there longer and longer, it became harder and harder. But just like the Secret Service members that were there, we would compare notes. They didn't like the guy either, but they were there still to take a bullet for him. So the way I got through it is that every morning I got up, I prayed about the day. I'm a Christian. I leaned on my faith. I realized that it was not my job to question the man. It was my job to do the best I possibly could do to inform him, to protect him, make sure he didn't get himself embarrassed by some of the young staffers, and give him, and which he would do from time to time. They would make some pretty stupid decisions. But I was oftentimes the only adult in the room, and my job was to make sure he got the best service that this young major, then lieutenant colonel, could provide him. And then when I would get away from that job, I would be able to think about it and talk to my wife. That was a different me. So I was sworn to protect and defend the office, and the Secret Service guys were the exact same way. And we commiserated oftentimes, but I'm sure that until my book came out, President Clinton had no idea of what I thought of him.
Now that the Clintons' power is changing, the supporters of that entire operation is shifting to whom?
Well, I'm not so sure she's not going to run again. Knowing her the way I know her, is that she's going to let a lot of these younger, inexperienced candidates beat each other up quite a bit on the way up, and then they're going to realize she's going to come out of the blue and say, you know, I beat him by 3 million votes last time. I can beat him again, and not throw her name in the hat. That would not surprise me. So I think she's keeping her powder dry. But knowing the Clintons like I know them, they are so egotistic and narcissistic that nothing will ever convince them that they've done anything wrong, that they've ever lost, that's ever their fault.